I am Callie Matthews, 32 years old, and I grew up as the dumb one in my family. While my sister Amelia sailed through Harvard on a full scholarship, I struggled with basic assignments. At her graduation ceremony, my father proudly announced she would inherit everything our family owned: a $10 million Manhattan mansion, a Tesla, and his entire fortune. I sat in the back row invisible, as always fighting back tears of humiliation. Then a stranger approached, slipped an envelope into my hands, and whispered, "Now is the time to show them who you really are." If you have ever been underestimated or overlooked, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. My story might just change how you see yourself. My earliest memories take place in our Upper East Side townhouse, a 5-story brownstone with immaculate white marble floors that echoed when you walked across them. The kind of place where children were taught to be seen and not heard, especially children like me who might embarrass the family name. My father, Richard Matthews, built his fortune from nothing. A tech entrepreneur who sold his first software company at 28, he worshipped at the altar of academic intelligence. His office walls were lined with diplomas, awards, and patents. He measured human worth by test scores and prestigious institutions. Nothing else registered as valuable in his world. My mother, Diana, came from old money. The Blackwell family had been Manhattan aristocracy for generations. Diana maintained the family image with military precision, orchestrating our social calendar around galas, charity events, and dinner parties where my sister could be shown off like a prized thoroughbred. Mother was thin, elegant, and absolutely terrifying when disappointed. And then there was Amelia. My sister could read fluently by age 3. By 5, she was solving math problems meant for middle schoolers. My parents called her their little genius, their prodigy, their perfect investment. They spoke about her future, as if it were a foregone conclusion: prestigious boarding school, Ivy League, then taking over my father's business empire. I was 6 when I first realized something was wrong with me. While Amelia devoured books whole, I struggled to make sense of simple sentences. The letters would jumble and dance across the page, rearranging themselves when I tried to focus. Reading time became a daily torture session. "Daddy, I can't understand it," I remember saying one night, pushing away my homework in frustration. "Stop being dramatic, Callie," my father replied, without looking up from his newspaper. "Your sister was reading chapter books at your age." Mother sighed dramatically. Perhaps she just isn't applying herself. Amelia never had these problems. That became the refrain of my childhood. Amelia never had these problems. My parents hired elite tutors for my sister, even though she hardly needed them. They enrolled her in advanced programs, summer academic camps, and private coaching for her already brilliant mind. Meanwhile, I was left to muddle through on my own, each failed quiz confirmation of what they already believed: that I simply wasn't trying hard enough. Family dinners were the worst. Father would quiz us both on current events, history, science, anything he deemed important knowledge. Amelia always had the right answers delivered with confidence that earned approving nods. When it was my turn, the silence, after my hesitant, often incorrect responses, was deafening. The only person in our household who showed me genuine kindness was Maria, our housekeeper. She would find me hiding in the laundry room after particularly brutal family dinners, crying quietly where no one could see. "Not everyone learns the same way, Mahita," she would tell me, stroking my hair. "Some of the smartest people I know never did well in school." I didn't believe her then, but she was the first person who suggested I might not be stupid, just different. Even as a child, I noticed things my family didn't. I could tell when guests at mother's parties were uncomfortable by the smallest shifts in their posture. I could rearrange furniture to make rooms feel more welcoming. I could talk easily with anyone from the doorman to my father's business associates, making them feel heard and valued. But these skills weren't measurable by tests, so they didn't count. Every summer we vacationed in Martha's Vineyard, staying in a sprawling beach house where my parents hosted elaborate dinner parties. These gatherings inevitably turned into showcases for Amelia's achievements. She won the National Spelling Bee. She completed a college-level physics course. She was invited to a special program at MIT despite being only 12. I became expert at making myself scarce during these events, exploring the beach alone or hiding in the boathouse with a sketch pad, the one place I found peace. Christmas mornings told the same story. Amelia would unwrap microscopes, advanced chemistry sets, rare books on quantum physics. I received pretty dresses, jewelry, and other ornamental things, befitting a girl who was clearly destined to marry well, since she would never achieve anything substantial on her own merits. By the time I was 10, I had absorbed the family narrative completely. Amelia was the smart one, the worthy investment. I was the disappointment, the burden to be managed. This wasn't something my parents said outright. They were too well bred for such vulgarity. Instead, it was communicated through sighs, exchanged glances, and conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The damage was quiet but absolute. I learned to expect nothing, to shrink myself, to apologize for taking up space in my own home. While Amelia soared, I disappeared a little more each day. Elementary school was a daily exercise in humiliation. While other children progressed steadily through reading levels, I remained stuck struggling with the same basic texts month after month. Math was no better. Equations made no sense to me, the numbers blurring and shifting when I tried to concentrate. My report cards were a parade of C's and D's, occasionally punctuated by an encouraging comment about my creativity or people skills that my parents dismissed as teacher charity. In fourth grade, Mrs. Langley, a kind-eyed woman with salt and pepper hair, requested a meeting with my parents. "I believe Callie might have some learning differences that are holding her back," she explained carefully. "With proper testing and accommodations, she could thrive. She's incredibly bright in ways that traditional education doesn't always recognize." My father scoffed, his expression a mixture of irritation and embarrassment. "We're not interested in excuses for mediocrity, Mrs. Langley. The problem is effort, not ability. Her sister manages to excel without special treatment." My mother nodded in agreement. Perhaps if she spent less time day drawing and more time studying, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Mrs. Langley looked at me with such sadness that I had to look away. The testing never happened. The help never came. I was simply expected to try harder. Middle school brought new levels of contrast between Amelia and me. She was already taking high school classes, her academic reputation preceding her like a herald announcing royalty. Teachers who had taught her years before would look at me with barely concealed disappointment when I failed to live up to the Matthews standard. The public humiliation reached its peak at my father's company's annual charity gala when I was 13. The event was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Hundreds of New York's elite gathered in designer formal wear amid priceless artifacts. My father, glass of champagne in hand, was holding court with a group of investors. "These are my daughters," he announced as Amelia and I approached. "This one," he placed his hand proudly on Amelia's shoulder, "is headed for greatness, 16 years old, and already accepted to a special summer program at Harvard. And this one," he gestured vaguely in my direction, "well, she tries her best." The group chuckled politely, while I stood there in my carefully selected dress, feeling like an exhibit myself. Disappointing daughter, American early 21st century. That same year, Amelia won the National Young Scientists Award for a research project on renewable energy. Our living room became a shrine to her achievement, the gleaming trophy displayed prominently where visitors couldn't miss it. My father had professional photos taken of Amelia with her award, which were framed and hung throughout the house. Meanwhile, I had discovered my love for visual arts. In the art room at school, I finally found something that made sense to me. Colors, shapes, and spaces spoke a language I understood instinctively. My art teacher, Mr. Santos, praised my unusual perspective, and eye for design. When I tentatively showed my parents a portfolio piece that had won a local student competition, my mother glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, dear," she said distractedly. "A pleasant hobby for you." My father was more direct. "Art is for people who can't do real academic work, Callie. It's not a career for someone from this family." By high school, the emotional distance between my parents and me had become a chasm. We existed in the same house, but occupied different worlds. Amelia continued her meteoric rise, becoming valedictorian while taking a full schedule of AP classes. I barely maintained a C average each semester, a desperate scramble to avoid summer school. The day Amelia received her Harvard acceptance letter with a full merit scholarship, the house erupted in celebration. My parents threw an extravagant party, inviting everyone in their social circle to toast their prodigy's success. During the festivities, I overheard my father speaking to his business partner. "Finally, someone worthy of carrying on the Matthews legacy," he said, clinking glasses. I was beginning to worry about the future of everything I've built. My mother's contributions were equally painful in their casual cruelty. If only Callie had applied herself like her sister, she lamented to her friends over lunch. But we can't all be blessed with such brilliant children, can we? What my family didn't know, what I had carefully kept from them, was that I had finally sought answers on my own. At 17, I used money saved from birthdays and holiday gifts to visit an educational psychologist recommended by my guidance counselor. The diagnosis was clear: severe dyslexia and dyscalculia learning differences that explained my struggles with reading and mathematics. With proper accommodations and different teaching approaches, the psychologist explained I likely had above-average intelligence. The cognitive tests showed remarkable strengths in visual spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and creative problem-solving, she told me. "You're not at all unintelligent, Callie. Your brain just processes information differently." I cried in her office, years of shame temporarily lifted by this simple validation. But I never told my family. By then, the narrative was too firmly established. The dumb daughter versus the genius. Trying to change their perception seemed both impossible and somehow beside the point. I was beginning to understand that their approval might not be worth having. When I decided to skip college after graduation, my parents didn't even argue. They seemed almost relieved to have their assessment of me confirmed. Amelia was off to Harvard, and I was staying behind proof of their two-daughter theory. One exceptional, one ordinary. What they didn't know was that I had a plan of my own. If traditional education wasn't my path, I would forge a different one. Without their knowledge or support, I set out to discover what I could accomplish when nobody was comparing me to my sister. Against my parents' wishes, I took a job as a receptionist at a small design firm in downtown Manhattan. The position was beneath a Matthews, according to my father, who offered to arrange something more suitable through his connections. "I'll find my own way," I told him, perhaps the first time I'd ever directly contradicted him. The design firm, Crossroads Creative, occupied a converted industrial space in Chelsea. Far from the sleek corporate towers my father considered legitimate workplaces, it was filled with natural light plants and open collaborative areas. From my desk near the entrance, I could observe everything: client meetings, design discussions, the creative process in action. Jackson Davis, the firm's founder, was unlike any boss I had imagined. In his 50s with salt and pepper hair, and always dressed in crisp button-downs with the sleeves rolled up, he had an easy manner that made everyone feel valued, from the cleaning staff to senior designers. One afternoon, about 6 months into my job, I overheard the team struggling with a client presentation. They had created several concepts for a new wellness app, but something wasn't clicking. "Excuse me," I said hesitantly, approaching their table during my lunch break. I couldn't help overhearing. "What if you approached it from the user's emotional journey rather than the features?" The team looked surprised, not dismissive, just genuinely surprised that the quiet receptionist had spoken up. "Go on," Jackson encouraged. I explained how the layouts they were considering might feel overwhelming to someone seeking wellness solutions who was likely already stressed. Using a napkin, I quickly sketched an alternative flow that prioritized calm simplicity and emotional reassurance. Jackson studied my sketch with growing interest. "How did you come up with this perspective?" I see things differently sometimes," I admitted. "I can feel how spaces and designs might affect people." That impromptu lunch intervention became a turning point. Jackson began inviting me to sit in on client meetings, supposedly to take notes, but really to observe and provide my insights afterward. "You have an extraordinary ability to intuit what clients need often before they can articulate it themselves," he told me one evening as we reviewed a proposal. "That's not something that can be taught, Callie." Over the following months, Jackson became the mentor I'd never had. He stayed late to teach me design software, explained business operations, and most importantly, helped me understand that my different way of thinking was actually a valuable asset. I worked at the reception desk by day, but after hours, Jackson guided me through all aspects of the design business. I absorbed everything: user experience, principles, client relations, project management, billing structures. My visual thinking, once dismissed as daydreaming, enabled me to see solutions where others saw only problems. Within a year, I was secretly freelancing small design projects under a pseudonym, Claire Matthews. I didn't want any connection to my father's name or influence. These were simple jobs at first: logos for local businesses, website layouts for startups. But each one built my confidence and portfolio. My approach to design problems was unconventional. Where traditionally trained designers often started with industry standards or technical specifications, I began with emotional impact. How would this website make a first-time visitor feel? Would this logo communicate trust? Could this interface reduce anxiety for users? This empathic approach, combined with my intuitive understanding of visual space, created work that clients described as refreshingly human. 18 months after joining Crossroads, I landed my first breakthrough project under my pseudonym. A promising tech startup needed a complete interface redesign for their innovative project management tool. The existing design was technically sound, but users found it cold and complicated. I worked nights and weekends in my small apartment, transforming their clinical interface into an intuitive, almost playful experience that maintained functionality while adding emotional intelligence. When the client implemented my design, their user engagement increased by 70% and subscription cancellations dropped dramatically. This success attracted attention in tech circles. Without revealing my identity, the startup founders praised the mysterious designer who had transformed their product. New clients began seeking out Claire Matthews, intrigued by her unconventional approach. With Jackson's guidance, I established my own design consultancy as an LLC operating completely independently from my receptionist position, which I maintained as cover. My parents believed I was still just answering phones, a suitable occupation for the family disappointment. They never asked about my work in any detail, and I never volunteered information. Sunday family dinners continued to be celebrations of Amelia's Harvard achievements. She was thriving, excelling in economics and computer science, being groomed for leadership through exclusive internships that my father's connections had secured. She won the departmental award for her research project. My mother announced one Sunday, serving her special roast beef that she made only on occasions worthy of celebration. The professor said he'd never seen such innovative work from an undergraduate. My father beamed, the Matthews intelligence showing itself again. He raised his wineglass in Amelia's direction, then turned to me with his habitual mixture of pity and dismissal. "How's the phone answering going?" "Callie!" "It's fine," I replied, the same response I always gave. They never inquired further. What they couldn't see was that my tiny one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn had transformed into a thriving, unofficial design studio. One wall was covered with a massive whiteboard tracking projects and clients. My desk held a professional-grade computer setup, paid for entirely with my own earnings. And most importantly, I was building something that was completely mind-free from comparison or family judgment. By my 25th birthday, my client list included several influential tech companies, a major educational platform, and 2 international retail brands seeking to revamp their digital presence. I was invited to speak at design conferences, which I always declined to protect my identity, and had been approached about writing a book on emotional intelligence in interface design. Jackson's connections in Silicon Valley proved invaluable. He introduced me to Thomas Bennett, an angel investor with a remarkable talent for spotting innovative approaches before they became mainstream. "There's something special happening in your work," Callie Thomas told me during our first meeting. "You're bridging technical functionality with human psychology in a way I've rarely seen." With Thomas' mentorship alongside Jackson's, my business expanded beyond simple design projects. I assembled a small team of like-minded creatives who worked remotely, unaware that their boss operated under a pseudonym or that she still maintained her receptionist persona. The day my business officially broke even was perhaps the most significant milestone of my young adult life. I celebrated alone in my apartment with a bottle of champagne I had saved for the occasion. I took a selfie of my solitary toast, but had no one to share it with who would understand its true significance. I had by now established a careful policy regarding publicity. I declined all interviews, never posted photos of myself online in connection with my business, and conducted client meetings primarily through video calls or in person in discreet locations. This wasn't just about maintaining my secret from my family. It had become a kind of personal philosophy. I wanted my work to succeed entirely on its merits, not through connections or name recognition. What began as a defensive measure against my parents' judgment had evolved into a pure approach to design and business. Claire Matthews, my professional alter ego, existed solely through her work and ideas. There were no shortcuts, no favors called in, no doors opened because of family influence. Everything I built myself. As Amelia approached her Harvard graduation with job offers from prestigious financial firms and tech companies, I approached a different milestone. My design consultancy was being courted for acquisition by several larger firms. The quiet revolution I had started in my tiny Brooklyn apartment had grown into something industry leaders wanted to own. I kept this development secret from everyone except Jackson and Thomas. I continued to show up at family events as Callie the underachiever, listening to updates about Amelia's brilliant future while sitting on my own remarkably valuable secret. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being told I would never measure up, I had created something uniquely valuable, precisely because I didn't think like everyone else. My difference, once my greatest shame, had become my greatest strength. Harvard Yard in late May was picture perfect, like something from a prestigious university brochure. Centuries-old brick buildings stood dignified against a brilliant blue sky, while thousands of folding chairs arranged in neat rows awaited the graduates and their families. Crimson banners fluttered in the gentle breeze. Everything about the setting communicated tradition, achievement, and exclusivity. I arrived alone, parking my modest Toyota several blocks away and walking to the ceremony. My simple navy dress and low heels were functional and appropriate, but lacking the designer labels my mother considered mandatory for important occasions. Diana and Richard Matthews had arrived separately, chauffeured in a sleek town car, both dressed impeccably. My father in a tailored suit with Harvard crimson tie, my mother in a Chanel skirt suit and pearls. From 20 yards away, I could already hear my father holding court with a cluster of other parents. Amelia has 6 job offers already, he announced loudly enough for nearby families to overhear. Goldman Sachs, of course, but also interest from 3 tech companies and a think tank. It's just a matter of where shall make the greatest impact immediately. The other parents nodded appreciatively, some looking slightly deflated by the implicit comparison to their own graduating children. When my mother spotted me approaching, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Callie, darling, you made it." She air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. "That dress is... You didn't want to shop for something new for your sister's big day." Before I could respond, an usher approached to escort my parents to their seats in a reserved section near the front for families of summa cum laude graduates. I was directed toward the general seating area in the back. As always, I was adjacent to the family celebration, but not truly part of it. From my distant seat, I watched as hundreds of black-robed graduates filed in indistinguishable except for the various honor cords and medallions some wore. Amelia predictably wore several gold cords, signifying her highest academic achievements. When her name was called Amelia Matthews magna cum laude in economics and computer science, a smattering of extra enthusiastic applause broke out from the VIP section where my parents, Saturday. I clapped, too, feeling the familiar mixture of genuine pride in my sister's accomplishments and the dull ache of knowing I would never earn such recognition from my family. After the ceremony, our parents had arranged a celebration at Harvest, an exclusive restaurant in Harvard Square, known for its seasonal New England cuisine and prohibitively expensive wine list. The private room was filled with extended family friends, and several of my father's business associates who had known Amelia since childhood. My father stood at the head of the long table, crystal champagne flute raised high. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows caught the bubbles in the golden liquid as he prepared to toast. Today marks the culmination of everything we've invested in. Amelia, he began his voice, carrying the absolute confidence of a man who has never doubted his place in the world. From the moment she showed her extraordinary potential as a child, her mother and I knew she was destined for greatness. Amelia sat at his right hand, looking beautiful and polished, in a white dress that had almost certainly been chosen by my mother. She smiled modestly at our father's praise, though I caught a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. As Amelia begins the next chapter of her remarkable journey, Richard continued, "Diana and I have made an important decision about the future of the Matthews legacy." The room quieted, all attention focused on my father. Even the servers paused in their work, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment. "We are proud to announce that Amelia will inherit the entirety of the Matthews estate." My heart stopped. Though I had never expected equal treatment, The finality of everything was a shock. My father continued seemingly oblivious to my presence at the far end of the table. This includes our Manhattan residence on Fifth Avenue, valued at $10 million, our vacation property in the Hamptons Diana's collection of art and jewelry, my Tesla Model S, and my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $15 million. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. $10 million for the Manhattan property alone, plus everything else my father had built and acquired over decades. The scale of the inheritance was staggering. My mother rose to stand beside my father, her hand resting on his shoulder in a rare public display of affection. Amelia has the intelligence to manage the family fortune properly, she added the implication, hanging heavily in the air. Unlike some, went the unspoken addition. Amelia glanced down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable, but not objecting. I know this is a tremendous responsibility, she said carefully. I'll do my best to honor what you've built. My Aunt Margaret, always slightly outside the family power structure, looked down the table toward me with an expression of awkward pity. And what are you doing these days, dear? She asked, in what I assume was an attempt to include me in the conversation. All eyes turned to me, some curious, others merely polite. I felt the familiar sensation of being under the family's microscope, measured and found wanting. I'm still at the same company, I replied vaguely. It's going well. My father nodded dismissively, already turning back to Amelia and her brilliant future. My mother's gaze lingered a moment longer, a complex mixture of disappointment and something that might have been regret, quickly masked by her social smile as she engaged the guests nearest her. The physical sensation that washed over me was one I'd felt many times before, the feeling of disappearing while fully present, of becoming transparent, fading into the background of my family's narrative, where I was at best a footnote, at worst a cautionary tale. I excused myself quietly, though no one seemed to notice, as I slipped out onto the restaurant's terrace. The late afternoon sun was warm on my face as I gulped in the fresh air, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. I had long ago accepted my place in the family hierarchy, but having it so publicly, so definitively confirmed, still cut deeply. As I leaned against the stone balustrade, trying to compose myself before returning to the celebration, I noticed a man approaching from the restaurant's entrance. He was perhaps 50, distinguished, looking in a well-tailored gray suit with kind eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. He walked with purpose, scanning the terrace until his gaze landed on me with clear recognition. "Callie Matthews," he asked, his voice warm and professional. I straightened, confused. "Yes." He smiled, extending his hand. "Thomas Bennett. We've spoken on video calls, but we've never met in person. I'm Jackson's partner." My breath caught. Thomas knew me only as Claire Matthews' successful design entrepreneur. His presence at my sister's graduation celebration could not be coincidental. Before I could ask questions, he reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a thick envelope. "I believe this belongs to you," he said quietly, pressing it into my hands. "Jackson and I thought today might be the perfect time for you to receive it." As I looked at him in confusion, he leaned closer and whispered the words that would change everything. "Now's the time to show them who you really are." Thomas Bennett, standing before me on the restaurant terrace, was no stranger in the conventional sense. As Jackson's business partner and a prominent tech investor, we had spoken numerous times via video conference, though always with me presenting as Claire Matthews' design entrepreneur. He had never met Callie Matthews, the disappointing daughter, the receptionist, the family underachiever. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." I began, unsure how to explain my double identity. Thomas smiled knowingly. Jackson told me everything, Callie. I've known who you really are for some time. He glanced back toward the private dining room, where my family continued celebrating Amelia's success. Your work speaks for itself. The name attached to it doesn't change its value. His discreet handling of the envelope and his timing suggested a careful plan. What is this? I asked, looking down at the heavy cream-colored paper in my hands. An opportunity, he replied simply. One you've earned entirely on your own merit. He checked his watch. Take your time reviewing it. It'll be waiting in the bar when you're ready to talk. With that, he nodded respectfully and walked away, leaving me alone with the mysterious envelope. I found a quiet corner of the terrace, partially concealed by potted topiaries, and carefully opened the seal. Inside was a collection of documents, the top page bearing the letterhead of Elemental, one of the largest tech companies in the world. My hands trembled as I read the first paragraph. It was an acquisition offer for my design consultancy for $30 million. $30 million. 3 times the value of my parents' Manhattan mansion. Twice the value of my father's investment portfolio that Amelia would inherit. Supporting documents outlined the impressive valuation metrics, my company's growth projections, client retention rates, and intellectual property assets. Charts and graphs quantified what I'd built over the past 5 years, translating my creative vision into cold, hard numbers that even my father would understand. A personal letter from Jackson was paperclipped to the offer. Callie, 5 years ago, you sketched a user flow on a napkin that showed me how differently and brilliantly you see the world. Since then, I've watched you build something extraordinary while asking for no recognition, no shortcuts, no special treatment. You did the one thing most people never do. You let your work speak for itself. Thomas and I have been preparing for this opportunity. Elemental wants not just your company, but your vision. They understand what makes your approach unique, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. This offer reflects your company's true value with no negotiation or favors called in. Whatever you decide about the offer, I hope you'll finally allow yourself to step into the spotlight you've earned. The world needs more minds like yours, ones that see connections and possibilities where others see only problems. Your mentor and friend, Jackson. Beneath this were financial statements, revealing my company's complete client list. 3 Fortune 500 companies, numerous successful tech startups, educational institutions, and healthcare systems. Projects I'd guided had improved user experiences for millions of people. My design philosophy had influenced industry standards, all while my family believed I was answering phones at a small creative agency. Specific memories flashed through my mind as I paged through the documents. The night I worked until 4 a.m. to completely reimagine a medical interface, making it intuitive for doctors to use during emergencies, potentially saving lives. The conference call, where a tech CEO implemented my suggestion to completely restructure their app based on emotional states rather than features leading to their most successful launch ever. The quiet satisfaction of building my team, finding other talented misfits who thought differently, giving them opportunities based solely on their abilities rather than their pedigrees or connections. All those moments when I doubted myself, hearing my father's dismissive voice in my head, yet pushing forward anyway, trusting my unique perspective. Each of these experiences had contributed to this moment, to this offer that validated everything I'd built in secret. The most remarkable revelation wasn't the money. It was the understanding that my different way of thinking, the very quality my family had deemed a deficit, was actually my greatest asset. My dyslexia had forced me to develop visual thinking skills far beyond my peers. My difficulty with traditional education had pushed me to find alternative paths to knowledge. My years of feeling invisible had honed my empathy and observation, making me extraordinarily attuned to user needs. I pulled out my phone and called Jackson, needing to confirm this wasn't some elaborate misunderstanding. He answered immediately. "You got the offer." "Is this real?" I asked, still struggling to process it all. "Every number, every detail," he assured me. "Elemental has been watching your work for over a year. The acquisition committee voted unanimously." But why now? Why here? I glanced toward the restaurant, where my family's celebration continued without me. "Thomas thought the timing might be significant for you personally," Jackson explained. "He has a flair for the dramatic, but his instincts are usually right." The surreal feeling intensified. In a single afternoon, I had gone from family disappointment to a $30 million success story. While my parents were announcing Amelia's inheritance of their fortune, I was discovering I had built something worth 3 times as much entirely on my own. "Do I deserve this?" I whispered, voicing my deepest insecurity. Jackson's response was immediate and firm. "Callie, you've earned this through thousands of hours of innovative work that has genuinely improved people's lives. If anything, Elemental is getting a bargain." As the reality sank in, I felt a profound shift in my self-perception. For years, I'd been operating in stealth mode, partly to avoid family judgment, but also because I feared I might not be good enough, that somehow my success was a fluke, or would evaporate under scrutiny. The detailed acquisition offer proved otherwise. Industry experts had analyzed my company from every angle and determined it was worth $30 million. My vision, my approach, my leadership, all validated by people who had no idea I was the disappointing daughter of Richard and Diana Matthews. I sat with this knowledge, letting it settle into my bones. The question now was, what would I do with it? I had spent years building a life and identity separate from my family. Did I want to bridge those worlds? Did I want them to know? As I considered my options, I realized this moment represented a fork in my life path. I could continue as I had been, accepting my family's narrative about me, while privately knowing the truth. Or I could finally stand in my full truth and power, forcing them to confront how profoundly they've misjudged me all these years. The thought of my father's face, when he realized his disappointing daughter had built something more valuable than his life's work without his help or connections, gave me a moment of petty satisfaction. But beneath that was something more substantive, a chance to break the destructive family dynamic once and for all. To stop the story of Callie, the failure, from being passed down to future generations. I gathered the papers, returned them to the envelope, and took a deep breath. Thomas was waiting in the bar, as promised, nursing a scotch and checking emails on his phone. "Have you made a decision?" he asked, as I slid onto the stool beside him. "About the offer, or about telling my family?" He smiled. "Both, I imagine, are intertwined." "I need to show them," I said, surprising myself, with the certainty in my voice. "Not for validation, not for revenge, but for truth. This secret has served its purpose, but it's time for reality to break through." Thomas nodded approvingly. "That's what Jackson predicted you'd say." He glanced toward the private dining room. "Shall we?" I stood, envelope clutched firmly in my hand, a strange calm replacing the hurt and anger of earlier. With each step back toward my family, I felt myself transforming from the person they'd always believed me to be into the person I'd actually become. When Thomas and I re-entered the private dining room, the celebration was in full swing. Champagne flowed freely as my father regaled the gathered guests with stories of Amelia's childhood brilliance. My mother surveyed the scene with satisfied pride, occasionally touching her daughter's arm affectionately. I had been gone for nearly 30 minutes, yet no one had noticed my absence. I waited quietly near the entrance, observing the tableau of family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. Thomas stood respectfully behind me, a solid presence lending me strength for what was to come. My opportunity arrived during a brief lull in conversation, as my father raised his glass for yet another toast. Before we continue, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. I'd like to say something. Heads turned, expressions ranging from surprise to mild annoyance at the interruption. My father frowned, slightly clearly impatient to resume his moment in the spotlight. Of course, Callie, he said with forced politeness. Keep it brief, though. We have more toasts to get through. I moved to the center of the room, feeling a new confidence flowing through me. The envelope felt substantial in my hands, anchoring me to the reality of what it accomplished. Today is about celebrating achievement, I began, and I couldn't agree more that achievement should be recognized. Something in my tone caused a subtle shift in the room's energy. My mother straightened in her chair, her social smile faltering slightly as she studied my expression. For the past 5 years, I've been building something, I continued. Something none of you know about, because frankly, none of you have ever asked. My father exchanged glances with my mother, confusion evident in both their faces. What exactly are you talking about, Callie? He asked, his tone suggesting this was another of my incomprehensible tangents. I'm talking about Claire Matthews Design Consultancy, I replied. My company. A ripple of uncertain murmurs moved through the gathering. My cousin James leaned forward, genuinely curious. You started a company? I nodded. Yes. We specialize in user experience design and digital interface architecture. Our clients include Telson Medical Systems, Educate, Global Beacon Financial Technologies, and several other companies you might recognize. I began naming my impressive client list, watching as recognition dawned on some faces. These weren't small businesses or local shops. These were major players across multiple industries. My father's confusion was shifting toward disbelief. If you're trying to compare some small freelance operation to your sister's achievements, I removed the acquisition documents from the envelope and placed them on the table. This is an offer from Elemental Technologies to acquire my company for $30 million. The silence that fell was absolute. My father stared at the papers, his expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and something approaching fear. He reached for the documents with hands that were not quite steady. This can't be real, he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction as he scanned the official letterhead and detailed terms. My mother, always quicker to adapt to social situations, attempted to regain control of the narrative. We always knew you had potential, Callie, she said with a strained smile. You just needed to find your path. I fixed her with a direct gaze. Did you? Because I've been working at this company for 5 years, and neither of you has ever asked a single meaningful question about my work. Amelia, surprisingly, was the first to recover from the shock. Looking genuinely interested, she asked, You built this yourself, without telling any of us? I nodded. I have dyslexia and dyscalculia. I was diagnosed at 17, but kept it to myself, because by then it was clear nothing would change the family story about me. My father's head snapped up. What are you talking about? I'm talking about learning differences, Dad, not laziness or stupidity. My brain processes information differently than most people, which made traditional education nearly impossible for me. But it also gives me unique strengths in visual thinking and pattern recognition. I spoke with growing confidence, years of accumulated knowledge flowing out of me. There are many forms of intelligence. The narrow definition this family has worshipped IQ tests, standardized exams, prestigious institutions isn't the only valid measure of a person's capabilities or worth. My Uncle Robert, who had always treated me with slightly more kindness than the others, studied the acquisition documents with professional interest. As a corporate attorney, he recognized the legitimacy of what he was seeing. This is a standard acquisition offer from a major tech corporation, he confirmed, looking up with new respect in his eyes. 30 million that's extraordinary for a company your age. Richard Matthews, my father, the man who had defined my value or lack thereof, my entire life looked physically shaken. He attempted to reassert control in the only way he knew how, through dismissal. If this is somehow legitimate, he said, struggling to maintain his composure, it's obviously a fluke. Some trend or fad in whatever this design thing is. Thomas stepped forward, then extending his business card to my father. Thomas Bennett, Venture Capital and Angel Investment. I've been working with your daughter for 3 years now. I can assure you, Mr. Matthews, that what Callie has built is both legitimate and remarkable. Her approach to design has influenced industry standards and improved digital experiences for millions of users worldwide. My father stared at the card, then at Thomas, recognition dawning. Bennett, from Bennett Capital, the same Thomas Bennett who had declined to invest in one of his recent ventures. The room had transformed. The celebration of Amelia's graduation and inheritance announcement was now completely overshadowed by the revelation of my secret success. Family members and friends who had barely acknowledged my presence earlier were now looking at me with newfound interest and respect. Diana Matthews, ever conscious of appearances, made one last attempt to incorporate this new reality into the family narrative without disrupting it entirely. Well, this is wonderful news. 2 successful daughters, the Matthews genes, showing themselves in different ways. I shook my head, unwilling to allow this convenient revision of history. This isn't about genes or family legacy. I built this despite this family, not because of it. I created it in the spaces between being told I wasn't enough. I succeeded not because of your support, but in its absence. My words hung in the air, unavoidable and true. Some guests looked down at their plates, uncomfortable with the raw emotion now exposed in what had been a carefully choreographed social event. Amelia stood then, moving around the table toward me. In a gesture that surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, she hugged me. "I'm sorry, Callie," she whispered. "I never knew how much you were struggling. I should have seen it." Her sincerity touched me unexpectedly. Perhaps she too had been trapped in the family narrative, cast as the golden child, with no option to be anything else. As I looked around the room, I saw the uncomfortable reality setting in for my parents. Everything they thought they knew about their children, about intelligence, about success, was being fundamentally challenged. The daughter they'd dismissed had created something more valuable than what they'd spent decades building. The inheritance they'd just announced with such fanfare was dwarfed by what I'd earned through my own efforts. "Dad," I said, my voice gentler, "now you always taught us that results matter more than intentions. Well, here are my results." He looked up, the man who had never been at a loss for words, now struggling to find any response. "I don't need your inheritance," I continued, "or your approval anymore. What I would like is a relationship based on who I actually am, not who you assumed I was. That's entirely up to you." With those words, I placed the acquisition documents back in their envelope and turned to leave. My mother's voice stopped me. "Callie!" "Wait," she called, her carefully constructed social mask, slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "Where are you going?" "I have a meeting with Elemental tomorrow morning. To discuss the acquisition terms, I explained. And after that, I'm going back to my company, which still needs my leadership, regardless of whether I accept this offer. In that moment, standing in the doorway of the private dining room with Thomas beside me, I finally felt the weight of pretense lift from my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of being the family disappointment, shrinking myself to fit their limited perception. Now I stood before them, as I truly was successful, capable, and entirely my own person. As I walked out of the restaurant, head held high, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the decorative mirrors lining the hallway. I barely recognized myself. Gone was the hunched posture and averted gaze of the person who expected to be overlooked. In their place was a woman who commanded attention, not by demanding it, but by knowing her own worth. Outside, the early evening air felt fresh and clean. Thomas smiled at me, a mixture of pride and respect in his expression. "Congratulations, Callie," he said simply. "That may have been the most impressive presentation I've ever witnessed." I laughed suddenly, light-headed, with the release of decades of tension. "What happens now?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "Whatever you decide," he replied. "For perhaps the first time in your life, the path forward is entirely yours to determine." The day after my sister's graduation, I sat across from Elemental's acquisition team in a sleek conference room overlooking the Boston skyline. My hands no longer trembled when I reviewed the contract terms. My voice no longer hesitated when I negotiated for creative control alongside the $30 million payout. What these seasoned executives couldn't see was the emotional hurricane still swirling inside me. The confrontation with my family had released 32 years of suppressed feelings, anger, grief, vindication, and a strange kind of liberation that left me feeling both weightless and disoriented. In the weeks that followed, I moved through important decisions in a state of heightened clarity. I accepted the acquisition offer, but with carefully structured terms, ensuring I would maintain leadership of my creative team. I purchased a loft in Tribeca that became both home and the new headquarters for my expanding business. The space reflected my design philosophy: open, intuitive, warmly inclusive, with adaptive features for different working styles. My first major project after the acquisition was establishing the Different Minds Foundation, dedicated to supporting students with learning differences. The foundation provided scholarships, technology, and specialized tutoring, but more importantly, it created mentorship programs connecting successful professionals who had overcome similar challenges with young people still struggling in traditional educational environments. "It's not about fixing different brains," I explained at the foundation's launch event. "It's about creating environments where different brains can thrive." The hardest part of my post-revelation life was navigating my transformed family relationships. 3 weeks after the confrontation, my father called. His voice, usually so commanding, sounded uncertain. "Callie," he began awkwardly, "your mother and I have been discussing everything that happened at Amelia's graduation." I waited, giving him space to continue. Years of therapy had taught me that I couldn't control how my family responded to my truth, only how I reacted to them. "We wondered if you'd join us for dinner next Friday," he said finally. "Just the 4 of us, to talk." I agreed, but with clear boundaries. We met at a neutral restaurant rather than the family home, and I arrived with prepared talking points and a promise to myself that I would leave if the conversation became toxic. That dinner was the first of many difficult conversations. My father, a man, defined by certainty, struggled visibly with having been so catastrophically wrong about his daughter. In his own clumsy way, he tried to understand. "These learning differences," he said during our third family dinner, "how do they work exactly?" I explained dyslexia and dyscalculia as best I could, describing how letters and numbers scrambled before my eyes, how traditional teaching methods had failed me, how Id developed alternative strategies. He frowned, processing this information through his rigid worldview. But you've clearly overcome them. You don't need accommodations anymore, right? It was a fundamental misunderstanding that revealed how far we had to go. I don't overcome dyslexia, Dad. I work with it. It's part of how my brain is wired, not a defect to fix, but a different operating system. My mother found it easier to adapt to the new reality, at least superficially. Diana had always been concerned with social standing, and suddenly, her disappointing daughter was a successful entrepreneur profiled in business magazines. She began mentioning me at her charity functions, proudly noting my company's latest achievements. But genuine connection was harder. During a rare moment alone together, she confessed something unexpected. I always worried about you, she said softly. I thought you needed to be tougher to survive in this world. I thought pushing you was protection. It was the closest thing to an apology I would likely ever receive. I didn't absolve her, but I acknowledged her limited perspective with as much compassion as I could muster. My relationship with Amelia underwent the most profound transformation. Without our parents casting us as opposing characters, the genius and the disappointment, we discovered genuine sisterhood for the first time. Over coffee one Saturday away from family pressure, she made a confession that stunned me. I was always jealous of you, she admitted. I nearly choked on my latte. What could you possibly have been jealous of? Your freedom, she explained. Every step of my life was predetermined. Harvard was decided when I was 12. My major was chosen to complement Dad's business. The praise came with expectations that kept getting higher. She twisted her napkin anxiously. You got to discover who you really are. I never had that chance. This revelation began a new chapter for us. As Amelia explored her own authentic path, eventually declining the banking jobs our father preferred in favor of educational technology, she and I became not just sisters, but friends and occasionally business collaborators. Building a life true to myself rather than defined in opposition to my family was challenging. In therapy, I worked through layers of internalized shame and imposter syndrome. Some days, despite all external evidence of my success, I still heard my father's dismissive voice in my head, still felt like the family failure. My therapist helped me recognize these moments as echoes, not reality. Your brain created protective patterns during years of emotional injury, she explained. Healing isn't linear. Old neural pathways don't disappear overnight. They become less traveled as you create new ones. I found unexpected comfort in connecting with other successful people who had learning differences. During a conference panel on neurodiversity in business, I met Jason, a software engineer whose ADHD had made traditional education nearly impossible, but whose hyperfocus had revolutionized database architecture. We bonded over similar experiences of being misunderstood by family and educational systems. Our friendship gradually blossomed into something deeper. Unlike previous relationships, where I'd hidden parts of myself with Jason, I could be fully seen and understood. The true measure of my healing journey came not from professional accolades or financial success, but from quiet, personal moments. The day I realized I hadn't thought about my parents' approval in weeks. The presentation, where I confidently mentioned my dyslexia as a source of creative problem solving. The morning I woke up without that familiar knot of anxiety about proving my worth. Most profoundly, I found purpose in creating environments where different kinds of minds could flourish. My company pioneered design accessibility features that made digital interfaces more intuitive for neurodivergent users. Our office culture celebrated diverse thinking styles with flexible workspaces and protocols that accommodated various needs. 3 years after the confrontation at Amelia's graduation, my parents visited my company headquarters for the first time. My father walked silently through the innovative space, observing my team at work, seeing tangible evidence of what it built. "This is all remarkable, Callie," he finally said, genuine respect in his voice, perhaps for the first time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, there were some wounds too deep for simple healing, but it was acknowledgement. And for the girl who had spent decades being invisible in her own family, being truly seen was its own kind of freedom. The journey from family disappointment to self-defined success taught me that intelligence has infinite expressions, that worth isn't determined by others' limited measures, that the very qualities that make us different often become our greatest strengths when given the right environment to flourish. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the freedom to become yourself, especially when that self defies others' expectations. My parents gave my sister a $10 million mansion and the burden of fulfilling their dreams. I gave myself permission to follow my own unique path and built something far more valuable in the process. Have you ever been underestimated or misunderstood by those who should have supported you most? Has someone ever tried to define your worth by a single narrow measure, missing everything that makes you exceptional? I hope my story reminds you that other people's limitations aren't your own. Your different way of thinking, learning, or being in the world might just be your greatest gift. Leave a comment below sharing your experience with being underestimated, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their differences are their superpowers. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your path to success might not look like anyone else's, and that's exactly as it should be.